Welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because August continues to go as expected and Bitcoin should be headed higher over the next few weeks. But we really want to see new highs for the global liquidity index soon. Otherwise, September onwards starts to look quite bleak and nobody wants to talk about this indicator when it's giving us a clear warning, and everybody loves talking about it when it's pointing to higher prices. The last time we were concerned about a global liquidity index downtrend on this channel was January of this year, but nobody wanted to hear it because everybody was talking about the Bitcoin strategic reserve sending price to 500K and corrections were no longer possible. And before that was March of this year when the global liquidity index had been in a downtrend, but nobody wanted to hear it because the ETFs were going to gobble up all of the Bitcoin supply and send us to 200K immediately. But both of those times, Bitcoin ended up entering roughly a 30% correction, and we are running into a similar setup here if the global liquidity index doesn't make new highs soon, and Bitcoin ends up entering that window in about mid-September based on current data. And the biggest narratives right now for Bitcoin are the corporate treasuries gobbling up a bunch of the supply and the recent executive order allowing crypto in 401k plans for US workers. And now everybody believes that grandma and grandpa are going to be throwing their life savings into Bitcoin this year or early next year, sending price to 500k. And now, are these narratives great for Bitcoin in the long term? Of course they are. ETF availability, these corporate treasuries, and people having more ways to access Bitcoin in their retirement accounts is great for the asset class as a whole. But usually when everybody gets overexcited, they get blindsided by a correction, and many times they end up panic selling because they didn't see that correction coming, because nobody wants to talk about concerning data when everybody is excited about a narrative. So how am I approaching this with my portfolio? I didn't make any changes to my portfolio this week, but I have been locking in small profits along the way in case this does end up becoming a much bigger downtrend and bigger issue that puts downward pressure on Bitcoin. But I'm still leaving plenty of spot exposure in assets I believe are going to head higher, like Ethereum, in case we do end up seeing a recovery in this global liquidity index and it continues its way higher. And as always, if you'd like to learn about my portfolio automation system that I use for profit taking and accumulation, or mental models I use to navigate this market, or common mistakes that I see hurting a bunch of investors, you can check out the Crypto Enjoyers program. But like we always do, we'll continue monitoring the data as it comes, and we have about a little over a month before we run into that really concerning time period, and I'm hoping for a lot of upward price action during that time window before we run into that. And the main driver of this global liquidity index downtrend has been the US dollar, which has been grinding higher for a while now. And now that the market is expecting rate cuts in September, October, and December, we're going to need to see more rate cuts priced in if we're going to see the dollar index drop lower. Otherwise, it's going to continue slowly heading higher, as the market has already priced in these incoming rate cuts. But with a slowly weakening labor market, a stubborn inflation rate, and decent growth, as well as an all-time high stock market, it's hard to see how the Fed is going to come up with an excuse to cut rates more aggressively, and they're likely going to have to wait for things to get worse before they can really do something and speed up the rate of easing. And we know monetary policy and the S&P 500's price action does carry over into Bitcoin, so we really want to see the S&P 500 continue to hold up here if Bitcoin is going to continue heading higher as well. But we know that September also tends to be quite bad seasonality-wise for the S&P 500, and that's why my base case remains that Bitcoin has a strong rally into September before a big correction, and whether or not that ends up being the cycle top will depend very heavily on what liquidity, sentiment, and price action look like at that time. And now I know price targets like 130K or 140K Bitcoin are quite frustrating because there's people out there promising 200K plus by end of year. But if you look at the market odds based on the options market, right now the market only expects a 3% chance of 200K Bitcoin by the end of December 2025. So unless the influencers calling for it are geniuses and they're seeing something the market doesn't see, it's very unlikely we see 200K Bitcoin this year. But the good news is that I believe Bitcoin can still head higher into this very expensive region before major profit taking causes price to roll over aggressively. The good news is that we haven't seen sentiment overheat too much quite yet. We're still in the upper area of the neutral region, so we still have room to head higher. And August has flipped green. A lot of people were saying it was all over in the beginning of the month when we started it off with a sell-off, but we've now seen a reversal and recovery, and I'm still expecting August to close green. Bitcoin continues to maintain market structure by holding above 110,000, and that's why Monday's free weekly report was called Maintaining Structure, because this is the easiest way to remain rational and know when to be more concerned about price. And it's nice to have a very clear invalidation that we can use to be a lot more cautious if Bitcoin ends up falling back below that level and showing those major warning signs. But for now, it's nice to see that the ETF inflows have started to slowly trickle in once again, and we're still seeing announcements from major endowments like Harvard investing in these Bitcoin ETFs alongside various state pension funds, and this is great for Bitcoin's long-term adoption and growth as an asset. But that's enough boring macro and Bitcoin talk. Let's talk about what everybody actually wants to talk about, and that's Ethereum finally trading above 4K for the first time since December of last year. This price action from Ethereum has been truly incredible, up roughly 20% for the week and up around 3x since the March low, and we're now above our range high at 4K. And we had that very nice retest of the range mid, so continuation was to be expected. And now the next target is the all-time high. We ideally don't want to see Ethereum fall back below 4,000 now that we have this much momentum, and we'd like to see this move continue higher, causing investors to pile in and chase the rally. Similar to the Bitcoin ETFs, it's great to see these Ethereum spot ETFs receiving inflows once again after last week's outflows. And a lot of this is driven by all of the excitement around these Ethereum treasury companies, which continue to gobble up a bunch of supply and take it off the market, causing these ETF buyers and traders to want to front run all of that buying, which is resulting in price heading higher. And it's no surprise that Ethereum Bitcoin continues to look solid. When it broke above the 20-week, we targeted the 50-week moving average, and now that we're well above that for the first time in over 2 years, the next target is the 100-week moving average, and I would love to see us reach the 200. Anything above that is a bit hard to envision as of right now, but I believe those are two reasonable targets for Ethereum Bitcoin. As for Solana, definitely not getting as much attention as Ethereum right now, but perhaps there will be a rotation eventually, especially once Solana gets its ETFs, but it's still holding the market structure and holding the levels we wanted to see it hold. As long as it maintains within that upward channel, I would expect it to continue higher, but a weekly close outside of that channel to the downside would be our big warning sign that perhaps something is wrong and Solana isn't going to go as high as we expect this cycle. Solana Bitcoin continues to look okay and just maintain that uptrend similar to the Solana USD chart. Since Bitcoin has been relatively flat, both of these charts look similar, but we do want to see Solana outperform Bitcoin because of the additional risk we take by buying Solana instead of something like Bitcoin or Ethereum. And it's great to see Ethereum really starting to catch up to Bitcoin here on the performance versus our benchmark over the past 365 days. And now it's actually Solana that's lagging behind the other two, which is really not what you want to see from a riskier asset. And I do believe Ethereum can still pass Bitcoin in terms of its past year performance, which would be very refreshing compared to what we dealt with over the past few years. But a lot of Ethereum and Solana's price action is going to come down to what Bitcoin decides to do. So hopefully we do end up seeing that break higher and end up seeing that move into the end of August that we've been discussing for a while now. But as we look forward, the federal government is still running huge deficits, and that trend seems to be worsening. And exponential debt growth means exponential money supply growth. You can see the big spike we've seen in the debt recently now that the big, beautiful bill has been passed. And that exponential debt growth and currency devaluation usually puts upward pressure on risk assets like the S&P 500 and fixed supply risk assets like Bitcoin. But as always, let me know what you expect. Thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.